All right. As I just said, I'm kind of surprised so many people show up. I was happy if 5 people would show up. Um, yeah, open source development. Is anybody here doing open source development? Just checking. Is anybody planning to do it? So what are you doing here? Is all the other sessions are boring? You probably just want to hear some stories. I guess that's what I'm going to be doing. This thing is not working because is the timer going to work? Am I too early? Oh, you're my host. Thank you. So, yeah, I am an open source developer. It almost sounds like you're going to an alcoholic anonymous meeting or something like that. I've been doing this for 15 years. I would say, any .NET developers here? Just checking. Like, do you actually know the library I've been talking about? Fluent Assertion. Some people know about it. Yeah. Sorry about everything that happened this year. But I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and not just that. I actually was asked, like, hey, maybe you can share some of your experiences being an open source developer, what it means in general, how you should act, what you think are elements that are successful or that made it successful. Honestly, I have no clue. And also talk a little bit about monetization or even commercialization. It's a very difficult word. It has started this year. Well, actually started last year, but this year there were a couple of open source projects that went commercial, created quite some backlash. Yeah, so who am I? Yeah, I'm Dennis Doomen. I'm from the Netherlands. Actually, it's pronounced Doomen, but who cares? I like to think I'm a coding architect. So I'm actually a consultant. I go into my client's space. I work with the teams. I spend half my time coding, and the other half I'm making PowerPoint presentations and architectural diagrams and stuff like that. I'm in the .NET space most of the time, and I've been doing this for 9 years. I'm 52. I started programming when I was, I think, 10 or 11. I saw some demos yesterday that I actually saw myself on my Commodore 64. Started programming in BASIC. I'm in Microsoft MVP. I have no clue why. It's always unclear how you become one or how you lose that title. Because I'm not always that positive. I don't use Visual Studio. I love JetBrains, for example. And Fluent Assertion is one of the projects that I've been working on for the last 15 years. It is almost 575 million downloads. I have no clue how it happened. But this year I also started a lot of new projects, which, yeah, because this whole thing actually gave me a lot of new energy. And I hope maybe I can give you some energy to consider open source as well. Yeah, roughly what I'm going to be talking about. Really, really quick. I love to get questions. I love to make it interactive. This is a small group. It's very intimate. I hope you're not afraid to speak English. I think Norwegian or Scandinavian people in generally speak English quite well. Because, yeah, it's a conference. Well, some things which I think and which I've been doing for every project that I've started since I created my own project. And by the way, these are also things I use in my commercial products. And with that, I mean the projects I do at my clients. You know, they're building entire big systems, distributed systems. Every system, every organization is building reusable components, packages, NuGet, NPM, whatever language you're using. And I use the same principles in case that matter. So it all starts with a great README. You know, what is this library about? That's a good element that should be there. I have this little template. I use all these these little batches. I like colors and stuff like that. It tells you how many downloads you have, how big your code coverage is, what's the latest release, how many issues are there. You can't probably see it, but it says pull requests are welcome. You could also say, like, you know, I don't want your pull request. It's my little project. But the whole point is to being open about that. I have an entire structure. You can even see a little bit of the which are the elements of this README. I also press my client teams to do this as well because it's important. You know, you want to be able to use a library, understand how to use it, how to build it, you know, how to contribute to it, stuff like that. That's really important. This is another part of it. You see, like, okay, who contributed to this library? What kind of versioning strategy do I use? And I'm even giving credits to all the other packages I'm using because, yeah, every open source developer that decided to build something for their own and they decided to make it open deserves credits. Because I'm pretty sure that even if you're not planning to do open source, you're using a lot of open source everywhere. Giving people credits for that is the least you can do. Because, yeah, a lot of them are struggling to find private time. I do this in my private time, as I said, full-time job, 2 kids. I like gaming, I like to watch videos. So I'm struggling with the time as well. Issue templates. If you want people to contribute to your project, you want to make it easy for them to understand how to file issue request, or how to file feature request, how to file bug. What kind of information do you want? Because if somebody files an issue, you want to understand what's the issue about. What is the version that they tried? Can they provide some kind of reproducible piece of code? That's all important because it is your time, your private time you're investing it. You want to make that easy. And with GitHub, it's very easy to build something like that. You can find examples on my own open source projects. It's just a matter of adding a little file in the .github folder, and you can create all these menus automatically, even have all these fields filled in for you, so you force people in a certain direction. So you should absolutely do that, and I think it's a crucial element. If a project doesn't have that, I'm already struggling, like how do I interact with this project? Great documentation. I'm using Markdown, but there's really nice tools these days like Docusaurus that allows you to build documentation extensively. This is what it looks like, for example, Nuke. That's another library that I'm using myself, and I really like the way they build it. This is built using Docusaurus, which is another open source project. So we use open source to build other open source, and then we build real products with that open source. Contribution guidelines. So you want to be open and have people contribute to your library. That's probably the biggest, I would say, thank you from the community, that like if they want to contribute to your project, they probably like the project. It has been useful for them, and they want to be able to, they want to be part of that. Streamlining that process, explaining what they can expect. There are open source projects which are great, but the developers are very conservative in adopting changes. So I've seen contribution guidelines that say like, don't push me, don't expect anything from me. You can create a pull request, maybe I will adopt it, and maybe I will just ignore it. Like what the hell why are you doing that? Why are you saying that? And then don't make it open source in the first place if you're not open to that. But making it clear what you expect so you don't spend the user's time on code reviews or discussions really helps there. What else? Release notes, obviously. The one on the left is automatically generated by GitHub. You can add some structure, like there's another GitHub template that you can fill in, and it will automatically take the titles from the pull request. You put labels in it will automatically generate that. People that use Azure DevOps are usually jealous if they see this kind of stuff, because they can only create a tag in Azure DevOps with a text field that doesn't do anything. On the right side is more like a functional one. That is something I maintain myself. But for most projects, I don't do this. I just rely completely on GitHub for doing that. Then the question about licensing is something I've experienced firsthand how difficult this can be. It's difficult. There's a nice website. It's called choosealicense.com that basically provides you some insights. What are the licenses that you should use? In general, most people use either MIT or Apache, which are perfectly okay, and they safeguard you against like lawsuits because somebody used your open source project and that caused a problem. But it's very permissive. Basically means everybody can do with your open source project what they want to do. They can reduce, distribute it, they can change it, whatever. But it's probably the best way. There's more extensive oversights, if I share the slides afterwards, by the way, which provides much more depth in details, like what does that license mean? Is it really important? Yeah, it is important, but the licenses are so close to each other. In my experience, it doesn't really matter too much anymore these days. Just use the website and you're fine. By default, GitHub will even create, I think it will use MIT by default or something. But it's important. Versioning, that is very important. That's a crucial element. I want to be able to use an open source package in my real projects as well, understand what I can expect. So I like to use semantic versioning. Is anybody using semantic versioning? Just checking, like, okay. Anybody has never heard of? No, you don't have to answer that, sorry. This is crucial. If I have version 1.1 of a package and my IDE tells me there's a newer version and it's 1.2 or 1.6, then I know, I assume, and I hope it's true, that I can upgrade to the latest version without breaking anything, because 1.2 and 1.6 means there's just extra features and it's fully backwards compatible. If it's just the last number, like I'm on 1.2 and we go to 1.1, it basically means they fixed something and it's probably wise to upgrade. If it's 2.0, yeah, then you should be prepared for breaking changes. This is important. This is one of the most important elements that I pay attention. Like usually as a consultant, if I go into the client's office, I write down guidelines for consuming open source. And stuff that's in there is, for example, well, the versioning. Is there clear versioning? Is there a clear release strategy? Can I actually see how people release? How many people are behind that project? You know, is it one person only? Then I think it's important to actually look at the code and, you know, and then make an assumption or make a guess or an educated guess actually, like, okay, you know what, if this one person stops maintaining this project, can we then take the code and maintain it ourselves? If your answer is that code sucks big time, it's completely unmaintainable, don't use the library. You know, if there's no automated tests and no high test coverage, don't use that library. Because yeah, you're on your own if you're unlucky. If there's a big community behind that, then it's probably safer. And it's not a black and white, it's very difficult to judge that, but you should. It's important. And I do that myself. And by writing those guidelines, I started to realize, okay, I should actually use the same, you know, apply those same principles to my own projects, which I'm trying to do as good as I can. A branching strategy, this is Git flow. Maybe you've heard about that. Git flow is basically acknowledging that your project cannot be released by simply setting a tag, but because you first want to do some dog fooding, or maybe you want to do some regression testing. If not, if the quality of your code is so good and your entire build pipeline has perfect code coverage, automatic code checking, static code analysis, for example, then you might actually decide that, okay, whenever I set a tag in GitHub, it can be pushed to NuGet, for example, immediately, or to your private feed or whatever. Then people usually use GitHub flow. These have become the ad hoc, I would say, release strategies, and I use them also at my clients as well as on my own projects. I think this is a tool that I use on the Windows platform, actually works on all platforms, called Git version, which will automatically calculate, and it's probably difficult to see if I can zoom in a little bit. It will generate, based on the commits, the latest tags on the branch name themselves, automatically a version number. And you can take that version number and use that, for example, to automatically number your package, your NuGet package, your NPM package, whatever you're using. Saves a lot of time. You don't even have to think about that. It knows that if you have a develop branch, which is a common branch if you do Git flow, this is the next version that you're still working on, it will automatically label it as alpha, like it's 1.1. So if your latest tag was 1.1, then every commit, every build on the develop branch will be 1.2, alpha 1, alpha 2, alpha 3, etc. Every time you push more commits. It's beautiful. If you've discovered this stuff, you don't have to deal with it yourself anymore. And this is a bit of .NET code that I use in my build scripts to execute a script like that. But if you're not in the .NET space, it doesn't matter too much. But so versioning, dependency management. Hey, that's interesting. Anybody in the NPM space? No JavaScript developers? Yes, come on. Yeah. Well, the 3 people that are doing front-end development, they must have seen this package lock.json. You know, you add one single npm package, you do npm install, and suddenly you have a node modules folder with 1,000 different packages because, you're basically pulling one package. This is connected to another one. I don't know why they haven't solved this. It's also pretty prevalent in the .NET space. What I like to do is this kind of model. On a very high level, because I've written articles about this as well, I have my main package. And that package only depends on abstract packages or packages that are very stable. A stable package is something that contains, for example, things that don't change often, like contracts. Abstract packages is more or less, they contain interfaces and abstract classes, usually things which don't change as much. So as long as your package depends on other packages, which generally are very stable, they don't have many releases over the years, or they only contain some bare minimum types that you need, the chance that you have this whole dependency hell thing is going to be reduced. I'm also making sure that whenever I build additional things around that main package, like additional components, I put them in separate packages so that you also can release them independently. For example, if you're building something that deals with databases, you might have like a in-memory dummy database or something for testing, for unit testing. I would put it in a separate package because if I fix a bug in that dummy implementation, I don't want to ship a new version of my main package. It will confuse all my consumers in a way. So this is almost like, I don't know if you know Solid. in the solid principles, it's solid or the single responsibility principle on the package level. And I do that very rigorously. I have a package called Pathy, which is like a Fluent API for working with paths, directory paths and stuff like that. I also have one that is called pathy.globbing, which makes it easier to say I want to find all the files in a directory using a globbing pattern, like the star star slash star star stuff. That depends on a specific Microsoft package, so I decided to make that an optional package that depends on this Microsoft package, so I can ship this one without having dependencies. Well, this is kind of abstract if explained like this. If you want to know more about it, reach out to me, I'll be around. I just learned that my flight is cancelled to Amsterdam, so I'll be stuck. Yeah, like 5 minutes before my talk. So this is one of the ways of controlling these kind of things. And there's plenty of articles about that. Yeah, these are examples of, in the .NET space, you can actually build NuGet packages that do not create binaries. So those are two libraries I maintain, Pathy and Reflectify. And you can already see the resemblance with all the batches and stuff like that. I love the batches. When you add that package to your project, you're not adding a DLL or an assembly as it's called in the .NET space. You're adding a C# file. It's literally a CS file that is under the hood, added to your project and compiled with you. Why is that useful? Because if you have multiple projects all relying on the library, they have their own copy and you don't have to deal with versions. If you're using another library that's using one of those packages, you don't even see that. There's no visible dependency, which means you never have this problem like, okay, I'm using that, and that is using another package. I'm also using that same package, but a different version, and now I'm screwed because the versions don't match up, especially because one is version 2 and the other one is version 3, and then, okay, there's breaking changes. This solves this, and it's pretty easy to do in .NET these days. What else? If you're still on Azure DevOps, you probably have all your dependencies being behind. I'm convinced about that. Because unless you use something like Renovate, because in GitHub you have Dependabot. Dependabot will scan all your dependencies, whether it's NPM, NuGet, one of the other platforms, and notify you every week or whatever you want, like, hey, there's an upgrade. In fact, it will create a pull request for you to upgrade all these dependencies. If you don't do that, and I've seen a lot of clients that are using Azure DevOps, all the dependencies are behind. Because somebody has to explicitly go to the IDE and say, I want to update all my NuGet dependencies, or I want to update all my NPM dependencies, which probably means you have kind of vulnerabilities everywhere in your code base. Switching to GitHub is one good reason, or this is one good reason for switching to GitHub. The other one is probably because Azure DevOps is gradually going to die, I suspect. Another thing is, which I built myself, is license scanning. You might actually be relying on packages which license is not actually accepted. You should think about, okay, what are the licenses, the open source libraries that are safe to use? And there's commercial tools, they're usually very expensive, and I thought like, okay, you know, not invented here syndrome, I built my own tool for that. Right now only supports NuGet, but you can basically specify which licenses you want to use or which specific versions. Like in my case, Fluent Assertion 7 is free. Version 8 requires, for some people, a commercial license. So I've invented my own tool to prevent people from accidentally upgrading to version 8 because it will just fail. I'm now building, as we speak, NPM, Yarn, and PNPM support. In fact, GitHub Copilot is building it for me, most of the things. But that's one simple way of controlling that. There's also commercial products like Black Duck and a couple of others that can do this for you. But they're expensive. Anyway, you should control your dependencies. So how to act? You need to be friendly, right? Yeah, you need to be friendly. You need to be friendly to people, but also be responsible. I literally had a contribution to my open source project where somebody was trying to push his feature in, and we thought like, you know, this feature is so niche, I don't want to support that. But I want to be friendly to you. I want to try to explain that. And he kept coming, yeah, but what if we do this? Or what if we do that? You know, and I should be happy as an open source developer that this person is actually contributing to my project. But I don't want this. I've accepted in the past things which I should never have accepted because I'm the one that has to maintain this. You know, that this is important. So be responsible. Think about that. You know, maybe make sure that they can fork the repo. Well, if your open source project doesn't get up, you can do that already. You just press a button, you get your own copy, you can do whatever you want with it. You can even create your own version or give it a different name. That's totally okay. You can also say, you know what, I don't want the feature to be part of my project, but I have an extension point that you can use. I have an interface you can override, or I have some kind of plugin model that you can use so that you can build this feature. And if not, you can say, okay, you know what? I don't want the feature. I see that you need it. I see it. I see this valuable for you. I'm going to build a small extension point so that you can actually add it to the project without directly affecting the project. This, by the way, all this advice obviously also applies to all the work that you do in your day job, because you have the same issues, especially if you're a big company, you're building reusable components across the company. Maybe you're adopting inner sourcing, which I'm a big proponent, basically adopting everything I'm saying here internally. You can do this as well. Or just say, you know what, I've listened to you, but I'm not going to accept it. And then they will continue asking, but what if we do this? At that point, said, this is done, I'm going to close the topic. It's not really friendly, but sometimes you have to be. I mean, it's just like with kids. Sometimes you have to say no. Yeah. But you should welcome contributions. One way of doing is discussing them up front. That's also why at the beginning I saw this whole template, that you can streamline the whole process. Make sure that you discuss up front. I've actually received pull requests from people, like huge pull requests, without any discussion, like boom. In the next morning I checked my mail, somebody created this big feature and I thought like, oh, I don't want to do that. And once in my career, as an open source developer, it's not really a career, but because you don't earn any money with it, I accepted a huge feature, which I still regret every day that I did that. So now I make it very clear, like if you propose something, we actually mark it as proposed. If you send us a pull request without actually creating an issue first, we just close it and I'll tell you, hey, read the guidelines. We documented this, don't do that. And then have a good discussion about that. And sometimes I refer them to Slack because, typing this in a GitHub threading thing doesn't always work. I've even had calls with people like, hey, I see what you're doing. I like the idea. Maybe we can talk about that. Think about compatibility. Think that if you introduce something, especially if it's a complicated project or it's used really broadly, that you have to think about what does this mean for older version of .NET, for example, if you have to deal with that. What if this is an NPM package? How does this rely on a particular Node version or something like that? These are things that can become very difficult, very easily, very complicated. But also consistency. If you're adding a feature here, that might be a nice idea, but that also means you have to add it on the API. That API also needs to have that extra option. This is where I spend most of my time, trying to think, like, and especially I have another guy that helps me on Fluent Assertion in this case, that does all this work for me. I just propose something, and then he starts to think about, hey, but then we have to add the other overload there as well. Otherwise, people expect this to work, and then this doesn't work. This costs a lot of time. If it's a small library, it's okay-ish. But the bigger, most of the contributors don't think about that. But also explain the consequences. Yes, it's a great idea, but it's me that has to maintain all this. I have to take if something breaks, if a new version of .NET comes out or something, I am the one that has to break that, has to maintain that. And I have a life. Doesn't seem like that because I'm very active in the open source community, but I have a wife, I have 2 kids, I'm the treasurer of my kids' handball club. I go to conferences. Now I'm stuck here in Stavanger is a very nice place, and I think the sun is shining, so maybe I will experience it without the rain that I've been experiencing for the last 2 days. I just have to find a hotel, I guess. But yeah, explain the consequences. It doesn't come for free, even though people think that. So the flip side of the coin, is everything just, what is it, rainbows and sunshine or something, or daisies and the rainbows, I don't know the expression. No, it is not. And just to be clear, if your open source project becomes successful, as in a lot of people use it, it is something that you're very happy about. It gives you also a lot of credibility. The fact that you have so many downloads. People actually think I'm a good coder because my open source project has 500 million downloads. I don't know. I'm a good architect because your project is so successful. It's just a tiny library. It doesn't say anything about my skills of being able to work with teams. Maybe I'm a very nasty person that, slaps my developers around with coding guidelines, which I do actually. But yeah, no, it is very Yeah, it is awesome. I cannot say anything. The fact that I'm speaking at conferences may have to do something with the fact that I did all these open source projects, that I became an MVP. I guess also has to do with all these open source projects. You don't get anything in return immediately, but at some point, and this all before it became commercial, people came to me like, "Oh, thank you for this open source library. It is so great." And then you don't know how to respond. Like, "Okay, yeah, you're welcome." You know. So there's lots of good stuff around that. The other thing which I like is that you learn from that. By putting your own code in the open, you get a lot of scrutiny from the community. Other people are going to look at your code. But I've never had any negative feedback like, hey, your code is crap. Probably because I write really good code or something. No, it doesn't work like that. But they will look at it and they will teach you new tricks. All these contributions that you get, they will they will teach you about new tools. They will show you new capabilities of your programming language. I learned a lot of new C# features or new things in .NET that I didn't know about until somebody pointed me out. And this still happens every day. All the other projects I maintain, I'm getting occasional feature requests and like something I didn't even know existed. Also, if you're on GitHub, there's the GitHub application, the GitHub website also has like this explore view, which will show you projects related to your project or projects that other people in your community, people that you like your projects, are also liking. I discovered really cool projects. Like as a .NET developer, I'm always struggling with enums. It's a very simple concept. It's very inflexible. And there's a nice open source library, it's called IntelliNum or something, that allows me to use code generators to create more enums that are more powerful, which are type safe, and you can parse them. You can use these enums in your JSON code. It will serialize automatically. I wouldn't know about this stuff until I actually, put my code in the open, and that is very valuable as well. But the flip side of the coin, because this all sounds very good. People have unrealistic expectations. That's what it is. People think that because you put it in the open, you have an obligation to maintain it until the end of times. You have the obligation that if they create a feature request or create a pull request, that you review it on the same day. That's what people expect, which is completely stupid, but you have to deal with that. This is what's going to happen if your project is successful. Usually I try to explain that. The contribution guidelines can also be a good way to explain what people can expect. You'll spend, if you're lucky, a lot of time reviewing other people's pull requests. And that can be a lot of work because you need to understand what they're trying to do. You need to think about this, the consistency I just talked about. You need to think about compatibility. So having like build pipelines and automatic checking is pretty crucial. I have a couple of slides at the end as well. So this is something I spend a lot of time on. My companion, that is also maintaining Fluent Assertions, is doing a lot of the reviews. For my other projects, which I'm working on alone, I have a very patient code reviewer, and it's called Copilot. So I don't know if, I'm actually not sure if Copilot is available for everybody for code reviews, or is it just because I have like a special license or something. But I let all my pull requests be reviewed by Copilot. I just assign it in GitHub to Copilot. It will give me nice feedback. And if you use JetBrains tooling, like I use JetBrains Writer, for example, it has its own AI system that can also review your commit directly from the tool and get feedback, which is useful. There's so much things you can do. In fact, you can now create issues, I don't know if you knew that, and assign it to GitHub. I literally assigned code like, I was building this package guard and I want to have NPM support. So I said, can you maybe create a pull request to parse an NPM file, so I get a list of packages in the package log file, and it did that. And then I replied, hey Copilot, can you also add yarn and PMPM? I thought like, I can try, and it did. And it's brilliant. It's even using my own coding standards and coding conventions and creating tests for that. I also do a lot of with Junie, which is the agent from JetBrains, which I use to automatically refactor code. Like I'm in a meeting, I've already refactored something, and then while the meeting is running, I'm asking Junie to refactor the rest of my code, like update all the tests to use my new style, and it will do that. And then my manager thinks I'm very productive, which of course I'm cheating. Last week, I had Copilot implement a feature on one of my projects, and I thought like, yeah, but if I create release notes now with GitHub, it will actually say this feature was created by Copilot. And I thought like, I'll take the changes, create my own commit under my own name, created a pull request under my name. I felt almost guilty. Like, I stole the idea from Copilot. What will happen in the future? Will it come back to me like, hey, Dennis, remember that one time that you stole my code, I don't know, in the Netherlands we have this, I don't know if this is an international commercial. There's a little boy which has a chocolate bar, it's called Rolo, and this big elephant is trying to take his chocolate from his hand. He pulls it away, and then like 20 years later, the same guy is now a man, goes to the same zoo, and the elephant didn't forget about it, and slaps him in the face because of that. That's what it reminds me of. All right. Oh wow, still have 30 minutes. Well, lots of analysis, lots of time. I sometimes even I can't do it in between like other things. I really have to get the code in my IDE, start browsing through the code base to understand what the impact is of this change. This is the stuff that will take a lot of time. And getting the right requirements. Getting a lot of proposals that I created turned out to be changed in something completely different because of all the discussions we had. Trying to get it right is very complex. Is this simple library? It is going to be simple, but the bigger it is, the more downloads you have, you're more the responsibility you have to think about that. And you recognize that. You probably built reusable components within the company that other teams can use that. You really need to think about it. Unless you don't care and just make changes and ship a new version and say, screw you, you'll figure it out yourself. I'm not like that. This is going to happen as well. Attacks. I'm Dutch, which kind of means I'm direct. Based on Dutch standards, I'm actually even more direct than most Dutch people, and I will respond really quickly. Not in a nasty way, but I respond pretty quickly. So if people start to attack you in some way, then I have the tendency to respond immediately. Not like, oh, you're a shithead or whatever, but respond. This is something you have to really spend time explaining to people that I'm not going to accept your feature because it is a nice idea, it just doesn't fit in our vision. And then you have to explain that as well. Never respond out of emotion. I'm an emotional person. I will respond out of emotion sometimes. I've learned not to do this on the internet because everything you do on the internet is there until the end of times and will be used against you. Don't go to Reddit, for example, if you put something on the internet. Don't go there. People point, like when I went commercial, people send me links to discussion on Reddit. I read on Reddit. I shouldn't have done that. It doesn't help. You feel very sad. Explain to people all the time you've invested in this. People underestimate how much time it will cost to build stuff. Even with all the AI tooling you have these days, you're still spending all this private time. I literally spent 15 years working on my open source project. I never expected this to happen. It started small, I put it out there, and it became bigger and bigger and bigger, which is, of course, a good thing. But yeah, it's personal time, and explain that to people. Sometimes they just don't realize. If you don't have kids, if you're alone, you have a lot of time to do whatever you want. Maybe some people know that and recognize that. But if you have like a typical life like me with 2 kids and everything around that, yeah, you have to choose. I sometimes have to choose between playing a game or working on my open source project. Especially when the game is good, like Horizon, I can completely go into that. And explain also the choices that you have made. Sometimes you made choices in the past because something broke, like you caused a breaking change. You go back. I forget that kind of stuff. Like, okay, what happened in the past? The other guy that I work with actually remembers these kind of things and finds back the original discussion of why we went left in this particular case instead of right, or why did we not adopt this particular feature or something like that. I can imagine looking at your face like, okay, why would even go this whole open source direction? Because it sounds extremely difficult. It is not that, but you need to think about this kind of stuff. So what about making money? You don't. I've also learned, like, I've never written a book, but there's a lot of people in the community that have written books. They'll tell me, don't write a book because you want to make money. You won't. Open source, you do it out of passion. You do it because you like sharing your knowledge, or because you hope some other people will benefit from it, and you get something back in terms of recognition. I already mentioned lots of examples that made it valuable for me. I never intended to do anything, and I don't intend to do it for the money. I have a full-time job as a consultant, which pays really badly, but still, you don't do it for the money. The best you can get is getting some money to pay, for example, for the DNS entry or the domain name or something like that, even though these are free these days. There's a couple of things you can do to bind or to get some bit of sponsorship. Maybe off of perks, like what I did at some point is saying like, okay, if you sponsor this project with $5 a month, I'll put your name on the website. I'll put a tweet on my social channels like, you know, thank you for sponsoring. Or maybe if you put $10 in it, I'll put your name on the website or something like that. Like JetBrains gave me a license for all their tooling. I put the JetBrains logo on the website on GitHub. Stuff like that. You can try to do that. It doesn't always work. Also depends on how visible your project is. I know a couple of years ago there was a guy that created, what was it? Was it Vue? The Vue.js project. He actually made like a full-time money from the project. Like at that time it was like 13,000 euros a month or something just from sponsors. That is cool if that ever happens. But yeah, these are things you can do. You can also say like, okay, I have this specific feature. One of the libraries that I use a lot is Nuke. Not the best name given the state of the world at this point in time. But it's actually a C# based build agent or build project. You can use C# to automatically build your whole pipeline and run it locally and debug it and refactor it. And it's an open source project. And the author, Matthias Kok, actually built another feature on top of it, which is not free, to create visual representations of your build process, for example. And you have to pay a license for that. That's one way of doing it. I've never actually figured out how to do that. You can also say, you know, I have a private repository in GitHub, which I'm building new features on, and you can get early access to that. Something like that. That could work as well. I know some open source developers manage to do this in this way. You might offer consultancy. I've done this a couple of times. Like, if you sponsor me for $100, I'll give you 1 hour of my time, my private time, to get on the call and maybe give you some advice on how to practice test-driven development or how to improve software development in general or something like that. I only got one request in, I don't know, 5 years or something. So, but there's ways of doing it. People have been successful. It's basically building a little bit of a business around it. But as I said, don't do it for the money. Do it because you care. I think that's in general. I mean, everybody that is here at the conference cares about their profession. Otherwise, you wouldn't go there. Maybe for the atmosphere, for the party, that's true. But generally, people want to learn something new. That is a nice way of doing an open source. Commercialization happened to me. I didn't plan it. It's just that an opportunity passed by that I couldn't say no to. And I thought after 15 years, it's actually 16 years by now, I'm not going to say no to this opportunity. So I'm going to say yes, which I did. Think really hard about the pricing. I don't know if anybody followed what happened around my open source project. There was quite a lot of backlash. I think also because the price point wasn't really smartly done. It was out of my hands, by the way. But think hard. Make sure you do it the first time right. Really think about, you know, what other projects are available. Look at similar tools. Look at what other tools that provide a certain amount of value will cost. You know, keep it very low because otherwise people will just find something else. Fork the repository, build their own version, especially if they underestimate that. I got a lot of feedback like, oh, this library, this Dennis guy, oh, I can build this in 5 days. Sure, go ahead. Took me 15 years doing all this stuff, but if it's possible, go ahead, you know. If that's so easy, why didn't we just do this all the time? Well, why didn't somebody do it up front? So get it right the first time. Don't make the mistake that we did. Get early feedback. I don't know if you know Jimmy Bogart. He created Autofixture and MediaTR, or whatever it's pronounced. I literally asked him this year, like, how do you pronounce it? And he just looked at me like sounding like a pirate. He actually did the same thing. He made his products, his open source products, commercial, but he actually communicated upfront and asked for feedback. What do you think is valuable? How much is it valuable? What do you think is a good price point for that? That's probably the smart way of doing it. And also make sure, okay, I mentioned this already. Make very clear who needs what. You know, what about non-profit organizations? What about government organizations? What about schools and universities? Do they need a license or not? Especially if you go for a dual license model, you need to be very clear about this because people get confused. And if you don't create clarity, people just go away and find something else because they're too afraid to adopt or use your library, even if they can still use it for free. Like Fluent Assertion 8, it's completely free for open source projects or non-commercial projects. But yeah, it's not always that clear for people, and then they become afraid. Especially if you use my own rules, you should only use open source projects that use MIT and Apache and something like that. Yeah, that's a problem. Okay, yeah, mention this, sorry. Things to consider, intermediate release. Maybe before you're switching the license, at the moment you do that, maybe you should first ship everything you've done to that point as a free version, and only after that start building features which require commercial license. That's one way of doing it, which we didn't, by the way. Maybe and that's something we should have done, create a separate branch, copy over all the contributions that happened from the outside. It's not something you built yourself in a separate version. Ship that as a separate release, and then move all the new features that you've built and didn't release yet as the commercial version. That's also a way of doing it. Probably something, in retrospect, I should have done this. Of course, this opportunity is never going to happen again, I guess, I expect, but that's a way of making it clearer. Maybe a different name. You know, the reason for keeping in the existing name is because you're going to be benefiting from the install base. People may know your library already, may use it. If you start shipping it as a commercial version under a completely different name, the connection will not be there. But the flip side is that, and this is the case in my open source library, if people are using version 7, they go to their IDE, they say, give me all the updates of all the packages, and suddenly using version 8, which has a different license. So that's kind of the choice you have to make. Using a different name could be an option for that. Be clear. Be extremely clear about everything. You know, communicate it in time. Make sure that you announce stuff up front, like Jimmy Bogart did. Make very clear who's in charge. Who are the developers? Who's responsible for the price point? Who owns this whole thing now? Who should you go to complain? Not just to me. You know, I'm still maintaining this, but make it clear. Like, can you still contribute? I think it's one of the topics. Yeah, you can still contribute to a project like that, but make it clear what it means to you. Like in this case, for example, we decided that if you contribute to this commercial version, then you basically lose any ownership for that. It's just you contribute to something that will be resold, but you can get licenses for free, like for a whole team or something like that. Make that clear, what people can expect. But also make it clear who's still maintaining that. Who are the main authors, the people that will approve the pull request, provide feedback and stuff. Also make that clear, if that ever happens. Backlash, yes, a lot of that. Yes. Negativity, unexpected expectations, entitlement. Some people, like one of the other speakers, they called me, hey, you're the rug puller. You know what that means? Like the rug is the thing on the carpet on the ground. And you know this thing when you have a table with all this cutlery on it, like what does you call that? I call this thing that you put your food on, plates. And then there's party was last night, and you put this cloth on top of it, and you pull it out, you know, this thing and everything. This is what people called me in the first week. Actually, somebody called me like this on the speakers dinner as fun. Like, you're the rug puller. You made everybody completely dependent on this open source library, and then you decided to make it commercial. Like, as if I had a clue that I was going to do that. It just happened. I didn't know all this. I didn't know this. I had never even anticipated that something like that could happen. I was planning to maintain all this stuff, and in fact, I'm doing this until I retire, which is, I think, in 17 years. So I'm not sure if it still exists. But people expect that. They also make claims, as I said, like, oh, I will build this in 7 days. People will create forks, and then they realize how much time it takes to actually maintain an open source project themselves. That's totally fine. To be honest, and this personal anecdote, the first week or so, I was like, ooh, maybe this was the wrong decision. I got so much direct attacks, personal attacks. My names were, as I said, people sent me links to Reddit. People wanted to interview me. There were even YouTube videos on YouTube saying like how bad it is, and you know, this asshole and stuff like that. It really hit me. I was even afraid I would be cancelled as far as I can as a local Dutch guy doing some open source development. But I was even afraid that maybe the conferences will not accept me anymore. Well, that was not needed. I'm still here talking about this stuff. But yeah, the first couple of weeks were kind of scary. Like you make it doesn't affect, I mean, it's not like I'm losing anything or I lose my job. Well, I would say even my boss called me like, hey, you know what? What's happening there? You know, he was not really concerned, but he was interested, like, okay, yeah, that can happen. So my advice, if you ever run into a situation, don't respond in the first week. Just don't respond. Let it go, which is very hard for a person like me who's supposed to respond immediately. Just let it go. And then maybe after 2-3 weeks, you will see it will die down pretty quickly. The company that actually commercialized this project told me already, like, you know, just don't read it, ignore it. And there will be people actually posting stuff on GitHub. They will create issues, you're asshole and stuff like that, which at some point I started to delete. Initially, I just let it go. Or they start putting additional comments on open issues, open pull requests, completely unrelated. At some point, we decided, okay, I'm going to close it down or even delete that, but not in the first couple of weeks. It's surprising. Maybe it was naive of me, like how nasty people can be if you don't actually look them in the eye. They're sitting behind their machine. This whole thing made me actually realize, like, if you're a famous person on TV, you know, or a model or whatever, how much backlash these people will get. Whatever they do, they get attacked by somebody, you know, and they make public statements, but everything is scrutinized. I never realized, and now I've experienced this for a couple of weeks, and I felt like, oh my God, I wouldn't even be able to do that. If the whole world is continuously judging you for everything and just putting stuff out there, you know, on Instagram, on articles. I don't know if anybody has experienced this public scrutiny before, but it's pretty scary. But it will all go away at some point. Just don't respond. Don't fuel it. Any questions, by the way, in between? Okay. I'm okay. So as I still have a couple of minutes, for the people that are in the .NET space, I have a couple of extra things which I like myself and I use often, is automated builds. This is Nuke. And Nuke is essentially a C# project that contains all the build steps that I have. I really hate, for example, YAML, Azure Pipelines, GitHub Actions, because YAML is a language to define settings or something. It is not meant to be like almost like a half programming language. If you use GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps, they now put all kinds of expressions in there to give it the feeling of a program language. You shouldn't be doing it. By the way, it's the same reason why, for example, I don't like Bicep. If you're in the Azure space, it's the same thing. It is not a programming language, but people build modules and stuff around it. I want my build pipeline to be in C# because I'm a C# developer, which means I can debug them. I get lots of feedback. I can run this thing locally, and this is what it looks like. You see the spell check, which is actually Node. You see everything that's being executed, passed. You see logging, you see coloring, stuff like that. It will give you documentation. If you run a script, it's basically a build.ps1 or build.sh, works on both Linux and Windows. I can define parameters. This is what it could look like if it's a very complicated one. This is C#. So it's a real project. Maybe you've heard about Cake in the past. Yeah, Cake is also similar to that, but it's not real C#. It's not something the compiler recognizes. And you can actually debug this. You get IntelliSense, you can refactor it, you can split it over multiple files, you can create your own NuGet packages to encapsulate common things. This really changed the way all the teams I work with are building their software. But the biggest thing is if you're building a complicated deployment pipeline, which also deploys to AWS, Azure and some, you can test this locally. You don't have to push a commit, wait for Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions to get feedback. It fails. Okay, push another commit because you made a space. There was a space off in your YAML or something like that. Those problems are gone. So I use this in all my projects. It even gives you this, nice visual representation of all the build steps and how they relate to each other. That's pretty cool. This is open source. It's free. And you should use it. Coding conventions. Yeah, I don't know if you know this in your .NET space. You have this directory build.props where you can put all your dependencies. Like I'm enabling all my Roslyn analyzers, which is Microsoft's way of automatically analyzing your code against all kinds of rules. There's a lot of them. StyleCop that looks at the structure of your code. C# analysis, Roslyn, Mizian2. I think that's how you pronounce it. And you put this in a file in the root of your project, and all your projects will automatically use that. That's one way. I use CSpell. I use CSpell as well. CSpell is a node what is it called? A spell checker, obviously. So your documentation doesn't contain actually spell checks. Is it that important? I'm a bit of a perfectionist. I get annoyed. Editor config, you probably know this because it works in all the languages. It's pretty powerful. You just put them in a folder. Even if your code is like you have to deal with legacy code, you can put an editor config in a new folder that contains all the new code so that only the new code follows the new standards. That's one way of doing it. If you're using JetBrains tools, they have a bunch of, they have a shitload of extra all kinds of checks, layout, automatic formatting stuff. You can put the rules also in the editor config. So you have a central place which is source controlled and tracks everything for your repository, which you do. These are the analyzers that I talked about. Which I also do a lot, inside JetBrains, in Rider in this case, I define my own cleanup profile, which is a way to tell that, okay, I use Ctrl-EF, and you can do this on a file, on the folder, on the entire solution, which will automatically format all your code according to the editor config. It can even optimize your code, remove unnecessary using blocks and stuff like that. And every project that I worked on, I introduced this, and that saves a lot of code review comments like, hey, the layout is wrong, or you should actually add braces after an if statement. It will do that for you, and it saves you a lot of time also in your open source projects. If you're building an open source project and it's for .NET, consider multi-targeting, because it makes it much easier for people to actually use your library. Not everybody is on .NET 9 or 10 soon to be. They may still be on .NET 4. Multi-targeting is a nice way because you're basically building versions of your project that works for multiple versions of the product. And you can even use if-def or if statements. It's called a hash if, and say, okay, this particular piece of code only works on .NET 6 or later. So you can diversify a little bit. Also have the newer people get new features, and the old people don't get it. Well, the old people, the unlucky people that are still stuck, they can't use it, but at least you can diversify a little bit. This is an example how Pathy does it. I'm trying to use my touchscreen. You can see Pathy works on .NET 6, but also supports .NET Standard 2.0 and 2.1. If you don't know what it means, it's actually useful for Unity projects, for example, or some older ones, and .NET 4.7. This can, by the way, become complicated pretty quickly because of all the different versions and which API is available there. I didn't mention this, well, I mentioned it somewhere, test coverage. I like to have a lot of test coverage. This is the Nuke script, the C# script within Nuke that executes all the unit tests and uses collection of code coverage, reports it in a form that can be used, for example, in Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions so that you get a nice report of that. Code coverage is important. I use also Coveralls, which is a free open source project that allows you to publish your code coverage results there, and then you can get a little nice badge. You can see the image, like this badge you can use, 97%. 97% is very high and kind of really ridiculous. This happened because there were lots of contributors that actually tried to add additional tests to my project. If you're doing test-driven development, this is pretty easy. Is anybody doing test-driven development just out of curiosity? A couple of people. Unit testing? But half of the people are not doing any tests. That's scary. That worries me. Do that. There's no reason why you should. That feels like driving without seatbelts. Or is that a common thing in Norway? No, see? I thought so. Although driving on these scooters without, showing where you're going to drive is pretty common. Because I did it. It's very scary to let go the handles and then try to do this as well. But it seems most cars just stop anyway, even though they have priority. I like these things. They're not allowed in the Netherlands. And this is a Nuke script which will translate the coverage result in, for example, Kubetira, because Azure DevOps needs another format. Or you can use the report generator, which is an open source tool, to produce an HTML page which can be displayed as a tab in Azure DevOps. GitHub doesn't have this capability, but will soon come. They're working on that. So that's important. Breaking changes to control them. I use something called another open source project, Public API Generator, which is specific for .NET. It will generate an XML file that represents all the public internal protected. So anything in your code that is potentially callable from the outside, either because it's directly callable or it's callable because you can derive from a class, essentially creating a snapshot of your public service. And then I use Verify. I have a unit test. I have a unit test that will then verify against the snapshot whether your pull request contains breaking changes, which is useful because I've actually accidentally introduced a breaking change because I didn't think about that. But just in .NET, returning the return type, changing the return type of a method is technically a binary breaking change. With that, it will just say, hey, you broke the public contract. And then I have a tool which is created by the same guy that created Nuke. It's called Verify. It's specifically for JetBrains tools. And I can say, okay, compare the snapshot with the new one, and it will tell you, okay, the difference is like, yeah, you made this one public, or you changed an attribute, add an attribute or something like that. And then it can say, I accept the change, and then it will update the snapshot, and I store the snapshot to source control, so you can also always see, find back in the past that something changed. It's almost lunch. Well, if you're in the .NET space, and this is something I didn't even know I had time to talk about, but as I said, I've been building all these projects, and at some point I thought, like, yeah, isn't there a way I can take all that knowledge and all the experience and put it in some kind of open source project that other people can use so to get started? Because every time I create a new project, even in my clients, we decided to create a little library. I did all these things by hand. I was looking at my own project. Okay, I need to use this tool and that tool. I create this script. So I actually thought, like, let's create an open source project. In this case, it's called the .NET Library Starter Kit, which is basically .NET New, and then you choose what you want. I want an open source project. I want an internal project. I want it to be for GitHub. I want it to be for Azure DevOps. And it will generate an entire solution with the README, with the contribution guidelines, with this whole build pipeline thing, automatic versioning. What else? It's there on the page even. It can generate binary package, but also this source package that I talked about to reduce dependencies. It has this package guard license scanning in it. Essentially, every time I find something that, hey, this should be in all my new projects, I make it part of this one. And I ship a new release that you can get started with. It saves a tremendous amount of time. And yeah, it's free. You can use it. I promise, I will not make it commercial. Anyway, this is it. I hope it made sense. I'm still happy that so many people showed up. Thank you for your time. I'll be around, apparently, for the rest of the day. And I hope you enjoyed it. And if there's any questions, there's a couple of minutes left before there's lunch.